Patrick, ever since I was younger, I have never really considered myself to be a confident person. And a lot of that has to attribute to the fact that I've always considered myself to be a relatively short person. And we all had this idea growing up that, confidence was something that I felt like you were born with. But over the last couple of years, actually particularly just like in the year of 2019, where I was kind of going through my whole like personal development and self-improvement stage, I started to realize that confidence is actually not something that we are all essentially born with, but it's actually more of something that can be created, fostered, and something that can actually be improved on. Because I feel like there is a big misconception about where confidence really is. And it's funny, like if you Google, for example, what confidence means, like if you just, google.com, what does confidence mean? It talks about this idea of self-assurance and this idea of like trust. I realized this whole idea of self-assurance, self-confidence, and this self-worth is all essentially related to your physical ability. And this is where I feel like confidence really comes from, is this ability to do something.
And it's not just physical ability, right? It's like what you can train your mind to do, what you can train your habits or the things that you really like to do and how good you are at it. I really like what you said about you aren't born with it. It's so true because part of the problem with the definition I found with Google's definition or any other definition is like it's one of those where it just uses a different word to mean the same thing, right? Self-assurance and self-confidence. If you don't have confidence, you're not really sure of yourself. So if you don't have either, does that mean you'll never be confident? So I never liked it because it doesn't really define what confidence is. I never really found like a formal definition of confidence, right? But there is something to say that like when you see it, you kind of know it, right? Like you can kind of see someone be confident. You kind of see someone exude confidence.
Let me ask you, so for example, your definition, or rather, can you tell me or tell us, if you were to picture a confident person, what does that just look like to you?
Someone that is just comfortable in the setting, whatever your setting is, right? So it could be a sports athlete, it could be a public speaker, it could be an actor, an actress, or whatever. They're comfortable with what they're doing at that moment, right? And so they understand what they can and can't do. They understand the little things to improve themselves. How do you describe, or what do you notice about people that are confident?
The confident person was always usually the most popular kid in class. And when you think about it, what makes these people popular? Usually, I guess one, they have like inherent abilities, like they were either tall, they were attractive, or they were smart, or just something associated with all of those factors, right? So for me, a confident person is, again, someone who's just self-assured, they're comfortable, they're authentic with who they are. And I think the more important thing is like not really caring what other people think about you.
Yeah, and there's an element of that. We all care about what other people think about us, right? I think what you're really saying, and what I take it as, is we don't let what other people think of us define us or define our actions. We don't let that be the motivator or the reason why we do certain things. And that leads to, ourselves being more confident. And one thing that I realized is, as you mentioned, like in high school or earlier, the popular kids, you have to recognize how you were raised, especially back in high school. What kind of support system did you have? What kind of guidance did you get at that point? And even at this point in life, and really ask yourself, what wasn't taught to you or what wasn't nurtured for you? Not to say parents do a bad job, because they could only do so much. But I think as we get older, we should recognize how we were raised and where our parents might have fell short in building our confidence, and then figure out how to address that, right? Like that's the gap, that's the opportunity gap to develop confidence as an ability. Like you mentioned, previously, it isn't something that you're born with. It isn't something that you blame other people for not being confident. That's another thing that I realize is people will be like, I'm not popular enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not good looking enough. And they blame something else for not being confident. But I think what we're saying is confidence is an ability. If it's an ability, you should be able to improve on it. But I think the bigger question for people, Brian, is why do people have low levels of confidence?
It's interesting, Patrick, where confidence and insecurities actually pretty much go hand in hand. Where generally, if you are a person who's not secure with yourself, more than likely, you're not going to be a very self-confident person. And the whole insecurity is kind of like what you were saying, kind of can stem from your upbringing. Like, did you get enough love? Did you get enough attention from your parents? Did you get enough, I guess you could say, security? Because I know a lot of times our environment can generally affect how we grow up, right? This is why there's a lot of like psychotherapists who are like, don't tell me about your parents. Because our upbringing is actually very important, how it shapes our character as we get older. And not to say we have to blame our parents, but a lot of it has to do with that. And as a result, it does build up our insecurities. Like, for example, Patrick, parents who, I don't want to use the word helicopter parenting, but for example, this whole fear, right? If you're a child where you're in your exploration phase, you just want to try and continue to do stuff, you'll have parents who are like, no, don't do that, don't do that. And it makes you feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. And this starts creating this whole fear of making mistakes. And you don't want to essentially start. And that's where, like, for example, as a teenager, high school, you start becoming fearful of trying new things because you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to make a mistake. This is not what I'm supposed to do. And this is where like that whole insecurity comes from. And it's essentially, again, confidence.
It's also interesting when you think about parenting styles and what our parents did or didn't do for us. The other flip side of that, Brian, is parents, they want to pay attention to what their kids are good at and what they're not good at, and then try to push them towards the things that they're good at. And what that inevitably does is put you on this specialist track. You're good at violin, so go play more instruments, music, everything, but nothing else. Right? So for me, I'm always insecure about playing sports because when I was growing up, I wasn't good at it. I don't have good hand-eye coordination, but my parents also didn't look for opportunities to expand on my sports, just try things out, try different things. But I love playing it. But they wanted me to study more. I had a math brain, and so I became an engineer. Nothing wrong with how I was brought up. But what it did was give me insecure feelings about when I have to play sports or when I, even now in this age, like, my friends, anyone will be like, hey, you play basketball? I'm like, yeah, but I'm pretty horrible at it. Do you play soccer? I can run up and down the field and barely kick a ball like in the right direction. And so I'm so insecure about even playing sports now. Because when I was a little kid, it wasn't ever, besides elementary school recess, I didn't really play sports for fun. At most, I played basketball with you, and you remember how bad I was. So I think what happens is, parents realize, okay, their kids are not good enough for certain things, and then they just stop it, right? They go, oh, try this other thing that you're good at, because the kids end up being so depressed. They don't know how to manage or even control or even react.
So Patrick, I know for the last like 5-10 minutes now, we've been talking a lot about insecurities and why that really affects our confidence. I want you to understand something. I know that a lot of people don't actually think about confidence in this way, is that confidence, again, is actually a skill and it's actually ability, and it's not inherently inside you, right? So let me give you an example. I've never been a good public speaker. In fact, I've never been a good communicator at all. But ever since I joined Toastmasters as of like 2019 to improve my public speaking and just to be able to improve my communication skills in general, I suddenly started to find myself having more confidence talking. Right? This is related to talking to strangers, talking to people, just in general, because I realized that going back to high school, going back to elementary school, the confident people that we see are good communicators. Well, there's a reason why they look confident, because they're good communicators. And that's essentially how we see confident people, is people who are good at talking to other people. But confidence is not just being able to communicate. It can be related to other factors as well. And that's something that I find fascinating.
To your point, it also is something where they might just seem like they're naturally confident, but in reality, they've been exposed to more situations where they have opportunities to actually practice as much as you did, right? Like practice the communication, practice talking in front of people. And that's what builds their confidence. That's what builds their ability to speak and to communicate. And so, when we were talking about this, preparing for the episode, I really gravitated to the fact that confidence is an ability. It is something that we need to get better at. We need to identify what we don't do right, what we do better. Practice builds confidence in any ability area. It doesn't have to be public speaking, it could be anything. School subjects, memorization, chess, sports, right? So, Brian, one thing I did notice when you build one area of confidence, it actually helps in a lot of other areas. Like, did you notice that too?
Like the reason why I got into physical therapy, not the main reason, but for example, is that I wanted to work on my ability to interact with strangers. And physical therapy allows you to do that. It's like you're meeting different people and you're talking and you're interacting with people. And that's one thing that I always consider to be my biggest fault and my biggest flaws. And going back to what you're saying, practice, the more I practice communicating, the better I got at it. And this helped translate to other things. So for example, talking to my patients, talking to strangers, right? And this improved my overall capabilities too, where I felt like if I could communicate with strangers, maybe I could be a better public speaker, perhaps going onto a stadium and talking to like hundreds of people, giving a TED talk or a presentation or something, because I feel like those things translate well.
It definitely does, from whether it's speaking in front of crowds, and I've worked my way up from like a group of 10, 20 people that I've facilitated a workshop to addressing, 100, 200 people for a big event or, a medium-sized event. I haven't done 1,000+ crowd yet, but maybe soon. It becomes a confidence builder because you're building up to it. And I think one thing that we realize in order to really develop confidence as an ability, you still have to overcome your insecurities, right? You have to be aware enough of what your insecurities are and that's holding you back and why it's holding you back. And you had a really good thought process on this where insecurity is a very emotional effect on us. It has such a huge hold on us, whether it's fear, whether it's not being good enough, whether it's, not liking the way that you look. But you flip that around when and you taught, you kind of taught me that, like, how did you look at insecurities as a way to actually overcome and start to develop confidence?
Insecurities. So going back to what you're saying, let's first dive down and say, what are you insecure about, right? Rhetorical question. Look into yourself and ask yourself, what is it that I'm insecure about? If it's superficial things like I'm short, there's nothing, sadly, you can't do anything about it, right? But a lot of our insecurity stems from generally our weaknesses in ability, right? Again, we're trying to tie ability with confidence. So for example, I'm just going to give, again, communication and the ability to talk to, let's say, people in your classroom. I'm shy. Why are you shy, right? It could be because I feel like maybe I'm not good enough to talk to you. Well, let's break it down again. Why do you feel like you're not good enough, right? If you keep breaking things down like that, at some point, you're going to find an answer to your insecurity. And therefore, you can work on your insecurity. So I'm going to take a quick example of you, Pat. You said you're not good at sports, right? Because essentially, I'm not saying you're insecure at sports, but let's take basketball. Like we played basketball growing up. It's more like because you don't practice, you don't play enough with me. I put in way more effort than you do, and this is why I am better than you, because I put in the practice, I put in the effort.
Yeah, definitely. Like I'm not practicing my shots. I'm not practicing just dribbling. Like I could barely dribble the ball. And so there's absolutely. And I love this approach of looking at breaking down the insecurities, the reasons why we're insecure, and then approaching it like a skill set, right? So being able to say, okay, this is my problem. I need to do this, right? Like you can identify concrete actions and steps you can take and then rebuild your confidence and rebuild yourself back up. So as you mentioned, take that insecurity and break it all the way down, right? And until you get to an answer. And you're like, okay, that's a pretty manageable, pretty addressable thing I can do. And then address it. Master it, and you move on to the next one, right? So it's listing that down. It's really good. You and I both love video games, and I can get lost in video games. And another area where Brian is incredibly better than I am because he plays more video games. And for the record, he yells at me a lot, like in basketball and in video games. At least when we used to play. But that's another concept that video game RPGs, role-playing games, make you build your character in its abilities, right? Explain that more, Brian. Like, how that relates to building confidence.
So, for example, we'll just take like a Final Fantasy or like just any type of role-playing game where you start your character off as level 1. And as you continue to go out and progress throughout the game, you're fighting enemies to build experience, right? Experience you could equate to like practice. The more you build up experience, your character levels up. And as they level up, you inherit new abilities that you can do to continue on with the game. And I feel like if you could equate your life to essentially an RPG character where you have to consider yourself as, let's say, if you break it down, math, science, English, sports, physical ability, if you all start off as level 1 and you continue to practice and build up that experience, eventually your character, or in this case, you, will also get better progressively at these things. And that's where I feel like that's where people have to start looking at their insecurities rather than something that, this is just something I can't fix. If I work towards it, I can basically overcome these insecurities and get better at my weaknesses.
And there's so much to be learned, whether it's like video games or sports or just even something like Toastmasters. You have this support group, right? So the other thing that we wanted to really mention is as you breaking it down and recognizing what you need in order to overcome your insecurities and build confidence, it's generally an individual thing that you do. But once you have that, though, it's actually not embarrassing. It's not a problem. And I encourage it to look for and build your support group. You got to build your team. You got to build your entourage. You got to find the people who are going to help you. People who are levels ahead of you that can teach you how to do things, that can help guide you and give you pointers and, really find a way to help get over your mental blocks, help get over your insecurities. Because that's the other thing about building confidence. You might accomplish a few small steps and then your insecurities will come in again and they'll break you down again. And then you got to build yourself back up. It's like, I was doing great, practicing my dribble, and I practiced my dribble really well, but then I got on the court and I couldn't score and all my shots were air balls or bricks, right? And then my confidence is back to zero. Like I could dribble up and down and make moves on someone, but I can't shoot it. So then you got to work on your shooting. But if you stop because you got hammered on the court for not being able to shoot, then what you probably need is someone to help you work on your shooting or someone to drag you back out to the courts. But the key thing is you need someone else around you. You need a support group, a mentor, a coach, that'll help you practice, push you to practice. This is, I think, something that people who are insecure will have a hard time agreeing with. And it's because you think you have to do everything yourself, right? Like I remember when I was insecure, I felt like I had to do everything myself to get myself to a certain level and then show up to the courts. Like I could never show up unless I could do everything. And, Brian actually dragged me out to the courts and I still got, schooled on the basketball courts in high school, but it helped to overcome my insecurities, right? And so there's a lot of it, but you shouldn't be embarrassed to ask for help, whether it's a mentor or a coach, and have that support system. I think, Brian, you talk a lot about like the practice and the effort that needs to go in. How much effort, like how much effort do you need to put into it?
A lot. So I know you were talking about support group, and I agree that is very important. But the one thing that I guess I'm going to somewhat disagree with you, and that's okay. We have different opinions here. Is where you are one of my biggest supporters, but at the same time, I wanted to not have to rely on you, right? Because otherwise, if I feel like I can't do something, you are my backup, but I don't want to have to rely on other people for my feel good feelings, right? I realize, people aren't going to be here forever. And at some point you have to rely on yourself to actually do the things that you want to do. And so regarding practice, Patrick, again, I want to use communication because I feel like that's something a lot of people want to improve on, right? We all know that the number one fear in America or in the world is public speaking. So I started small. I told myself, you know what, I'm going to overcome this shyness and I'm going to start small. But what did I have to do? I started saying hi to people in the elevator. Just saying hi, good morning, good evening, or that's it, okay? So this wasn't too bad. It didn't kill me. I didn't feel like I was gonna die. So second step, all right, let's go to like Trader Joe's or Vons or some type of supermarket and just having a small like 5-10 second conversation with the cashier, just like, how are you doing? How's your day going? The more I started to do that, I started feeling like, you know what? This isn't as bad as I thought it was. I wasn't dying. I wasn't going to be like, get the hell out. Why are you talking to me, sir? Like, don't talk to me, which I know a lot of people have, because that's what I have. Like, why is this person talking to me? But then you realize people don't actually think that of you. They're like, they actually appreciate the kind gesture that you're trying to talk to them. And so then again, joining a Toastmasters group and learning how to, let's say, not have filler words, learning how to decrease my rate of speed for communication, for example, and just learning how to just talk. And this is where everyone needs to understand is the more you practice, whether you're bad at math, you're bad at physics, you have to practice and put in the effort, do the homework assignments, and you'll get better.
And another thing that we've learned, and I've learned in particular, is you gotta fail. And failure is avoided so much by people today. Except all the people that are successful, they tell stories about their failures, not really their success, right? They tell stories about their journey, what they had to do to get there, how they got bankrupt and they still pick themselves up or whatever it is. I think one thing that really comes into play when you're building your confidence is we can't really tie our emotional state, our emotional baggage from our insecurities with the results or the lack of results that we're trying to improve our ability, that builds our confidence. And so that's something that like I realized over and over again. Failure for me came especially a lot in my job. And some of my early years as a private consultant, you go and you try to win work. And you think it's based on this or you're based on that. Like you have guidance, some people tell you stuff. In the end, you're responsible for winning work and bringing in new projects. There was constant failure in that. I always got beat out. Why did I get beat out? I know that person, I should be better than them. They should have picked me. The client should have picked me. And there's a lot of learnings that I had to go about even just how to create something that was, desirable to get chosen. But even on a more personal level, not being able to speak well in meetings or get my point across. So for me, I would say something and people are like, I have no idea what you're saying. That was constant failures. And what I had to do was take my emotions out of it. The failures constantly weighed me down. I'm like, I'm not good enough. Or, oh, you know what? Actually, what I'm thinking is not really useful information. It's just a bunch of noise. It's just sounds that are coming out of my mouth, right? And what I didn't realize is I wasn't forming complete thoughts in my head before I speak. And that makes a big difference on how effective you are as a communicator. So for a long time, I put my failure of losing proposals or failure of doing bad interviews or failure of impressing my managers in meetings as this insecure emotion that I actually am not smart. I'm just faking it. And I'm one of those people who think they're smart and just talk and they don't have any idea what they're talking about. Right. So it just led me down this really, really bad path until I did a mind shift. I changed my mindset. I would gotta say, you gotta embrace failure, but don't respond to failure with emotions, right? The more you could be objective about your failure, the more you can break down why you failed, the better off you'll be and the better you can overcome kind of all those little barriers that you set up. So yeah, to me, that's another kind of message I want to tell people. You got to fail.
Patrick, I 100% agree with you on this idea that you can't tie your results to emotions, or you can't tie your emotions to the results. Like, remember when I was in grad school, if I got like a C or like a D in my exam, I would take it personal because it's like I feel like I wasn't good enough. I'm not smart enough to be this good PT that I wanted to be. But I realized that rather than looking at it as a guy like I'm such an idiot, it's more like, okay, these were my weaknesses. This is where I'm, not strong enough, and I need to improve on these specific parts of, let's say, anatomy or physiology or some sort of anything, that I failed upon. And I remember when I was talking to a friend about taking her exam for like this national state exam for being a dietitian, she asked me what my studying habits were. And I told her I would take the practice exam first get my results and see where I scored the lowest in. That way, I could see what I need to work upon. And I think that's a really good way that we need to look at everything that happens to us in our life, particularly in our skill sets and our abilities. It's like, look at it as, again, purely objective, like what you said. Things that you're weakest in is the things that you probably want to improve on, right? So I totally 100% agree with you on just continuing to make mistakes so that you could learn from those experiences.
Yeah, it definitely, makes a big difference once you take that pressure off too. Because, the pressure we put on ourselves drives how strong of a hold those insecurities have on our own progress. Yeah, and so we really just want people to, look at building your confidence as a skill set that you can develop and nurture, and really understanding that developing your confidence, to start to develop your confidence, you have to understand, be aware of, and address your insecurity. You have to break down all your insecurity to the smallest problem that you can solve. And once you figure that out, you can rebuild that up. We can overcome your insecurity, build up your confidence, and then really find ways to improve upon it and not shy away from fear and of failing, not shy away from not being good enough and letting those insecurities back in, but rather using each and every step as a building block. And just like we mentioned, whether it's a video game or, sports or, public speaking, you got to start off at level 1 and then build your character up. In this case, your character is you. And so for insights like that, join us again next week for another episode of the Introspection Hour with Brian and Patrick. Thanks, everyone.
See you guys.